Welcome back, everyone, to Chop for Time. Myself and Pastor Thomas will be sitting down here in just a few moments.
Just realizing as I'm editing this, Ben is out of focus for the entire video. I apologize. If it bothers you as much as it bothers me, I'm very sorry. But enjoy the rest of this video anyway, and get back to it.
Actually, however long it takes for this intro to play, as we're going to be talking about our sermon from this past Sunday, The Shoes of the Gospel of Peace.
I feel like it has been a roller coaster of 4 days.
It has been. You're feeling that way because it has been a roller coaster.
It's been crazy. Yeah. Things going on here in the church. There's been a lot happening. Been a lot of difficult things going on in the community. And then, on top of that, with trunk or treat and regular Sunday stuff.
So we had some celebratory stuff, and it's according to how you look at it. I mean, there's been a couple, losses in the community, both believers in Jesus Christ. So there is an element of celebration to that, but also an element of grief. But Saturday, trunk or treat.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we were going to be able to have that at all with the weather, with the way that it was.
There was one moment when it started pouring, or bucketing, as we would say back home.
Listen, that sounds like Appalachia.
It doesn't. It sounds pretty similar. Bucketing down back home. It just started to pour, and I was like, well, maybe not. But no, it cleared up, and we had a lot of kids come through, right?
That might have been, we've never been able to do an accurate count of how many people come through. We've tried before, and that was a fruitless endeavor.
Because you get those kids who go through 5 times.
You
do.
And then we were, at one point I introduced the concept, why don't we just take a black Sharpie and just put an X on their forehead so we know that they've already been
like a
here.
Nightclub stamp thing.
I like the Sharpie concept, but no. I will say I do believe that was probably the most people that we've seen come through Very one cool. of those. And it wasn't just because typically at the beginning they're lined up well down the sidewalk in front of, going down towards, the courthouse area. But there wasn't as many initially this year lined up, but they just kept coming. Yeah. It was just wave after wave. And about 7:30, we were out of candy.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
It's a good sign.
It was fun. Sure. I think everybody had fun. The youth group set up the van and had some kind of monster.
Yeah, it turned out great.
Mouth coming out the back of it. It was good.
Actually, some of our high schoolers' idea to do, and it just turned out great. I thought it looked really cool. Yeah. So they did a good job.
The rest of the weekend, our sympathies, prayers, condolences to the family of Daxton McDavid and also Bruce McGlone. You and I were talking that there was, we were part of 2 different spectrums of the element of loss that I think that we can experience. Dax, 4 years old, battled with his health basically since birth, and just life cut way too short. Yeah. Then on the other end of the spectrum, Bruce McGlone, a gentleman who's been part of my life for almost as long as I can remember, 87 years old, lost his wife a few years ago, and really ever since that time just wanted to be with her.
Right.
And a life well lived, a long life, a full life. Both families grieving, but 2 very different types of grief to some degree. Sure. So just remember the McGlone family, the McDavid family, as they, the new normal. That's taken on a whole different meaning in 2020 and 2021. But really, when you lose a loved one, the whirlwind that is the visitation, the funeral process and stuff, that's a lot to process to begin with. But once all of that's done, and you just kind of start settling back into what this routine of life is, it's completely different. Yeah. And it's a huge adjustment. So let's be praying for them for sure.
For sure. And on Sunday was actually Halloween. And we had service that went really well. The worship was fantastic. We actually had people, I think they picked up from the previous week whenever Kennedy's mic died, and we all made comments on it was great and that people should sing up more often. Yeah. I think they
sounded really good.
They seem to go with it this week, which is great. We're talking about the shoes of the readiness of. Wait, no. Put on the readiness of the shoes of gospel of peace. There's a lot of ofs.
There is.
It's a very strange.
Paul compounds a lot into this statement here, but it's Ephesians 6:15. As shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. Some translations, the word shoes isn't even in there. Yeah, it's just kind of implied that that's what you put on your feet.
Right.
So yeah, it's the readiness of the gospel of peace.
Very cool.
So that was the piece of armor that we talked about on Sunday.
Very cool. The two before that, the first one was the belt of truth, and then the breastplate of righteousness, and then the shoes. Is there purpose to the order in which, I know the belt, we kind of talked about the fact that the belt is the sort of thing that everything gets attached to, or that holds everything together, right? Yeah. Is there purpose to the order of these things, or is it just he's going through it?
I think you can make a case for that.
Right.
But I think you
don't know if it was Paul's intention.
Right. I don't think we could. I think we could get lost in the weeds if we tried to build some theological premise around that.
Right.
He could be.
There's probably a book about it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. And then there's another book that counterpoints the book that was written. So there very well could be.
Yeah.
And I could see where you could make a case for it. I do think that there is indeed a case to be made for the belt of truth being placed first. But I mean, it's hard to say because we're looking at the shoes of peace, the gospel of peace at this point. Then next week we're going to be moving into the shield of faith, and then it'll go to the helmet of salvation. So I don't know if you could put in an area of importance or building upon one another that one is going to be more important than another.
Every piece is important.
Yeah, but I do think the one thing that we can definitely say is that they're all interdependent. They all are, just like we were talking about. Most everything is attached or fastened in some shape, form, or fashion to the belt of truth. If you're missing one piece of it, the others are going to be compromised. Right. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, very cool. And you showed off 2 different pairs of shoes on Sunday, which was 2 very different pairs of shoes. There was the sort of ancient Roman soldier shoe, and to probably most of my kids in our youth group, the ancient pair of basketball shoes.
So let's just be honest, they were ancient. All right, we're talking about 31 years ago now.
Crazy.
So I talked about my Nike pumps and an event that took place in my formative years on a basketball court in a land far, far away known as Hitchens. That was kind of a little crowd responsive at that point.
Yeah. But it was cool having the image of the Roman shoe actually, because it does put into perspective, or a good visual aid of especially seeing the spikes on the bottom of you pointed out it's kind of like a cleat. It digs into the ground a little bit. It gives you a firmer grip on. You're less likely to fall over. With. Right.
Especially when you're
going with that.
Yeah.
But
when you're looking at hand-to-hand combat in particular, which the spiritual warfare is indicative of that Paul was talking about. It's important to have sure footing because if you get onto an incline, a decline, any type of terrain, sure footing is where your advantage is going to come from or be lost. So very cool. So we dived all over the place. We were early in Ephesians, in Galatians, in Philippians. Romans, Philippians, Colossians, all over the place. 1 Peter, Acts. Turns out peace is it's kind of a big deal. Yeah, they talk about it a little bit in the Bible. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah. And we had gone back to Ephesians 2:14 again. Paul's already talked about this, so he didn't have to spend a whole lot of time articulating what peace is on this and these shoes that he's instructing us to put on. But basically, starting with verse 14, for he himself is our peace. Yeah. And I won't read the rest of it there, but it's talking. This is a section where he's coming off and explaining the the dividing walls of hostility being torn down between the Jews and the Gentiles, that God has made peace amongst all mankind, and that He is our peace. That peace that He has made is He Himself, His Son, and that's kind of where we started defining, hey, what is peace? And we looked at 3 different sources on Sunday morning. We have the peace with God, which is the really big deal.
That's that more personal, relationship.
Yeah, salvific peace of I am now no longer at odds. I've been justified through my faith in Jesus Christ, and I've been made right, and that's the peace that I have. That was at Romans 5:1 that we looked at. Then we looked at internal peace, which we have this. That's where we give. We looked at Philippians chapter 4, that in all things, giving thanks through prayer and supplication. It's just this internal peace that we have now available to us. That no matter what's going on around us, our source of hope and our source of peace isn't shaken. Everything else can be shaken. And we can have moments of, just kind of wigging out a little bit, but the internal source hasn't been shaken. And then the eternal peace, we've got a source of eternal peace. And we looked at in the book of Colossians then, talking about the promise that through Jesus Christ, God sending His Son, and our faith in Him, and living the lifestyle, living this out, that breastplate of righteousness thing again, that right living, that we have the promise of eternity. Yeah. We have that peace in our hearts. Yeah.
Because it's interesting, because a lot of people, myself included, would probably hope that the third point would be external peace.
Yeah.
Like we were just waiting. It's like, okay, we've got peace with God, we've got internal peace and external peace. Great. Yeah. Everything is at peace. No. But that's, we do get external peace, but not yet. Right. It's a guaranteed thing that comes later.
Eternally.
Yeah. But no, I liked what you said about the internal peace, especially of that it's regardless of external circumstances, internal peace is possible with God. And I don't think that's really the case with anything else.
Nothing that I'm aware of.
You can probably claim it, but I don't think it's real.
And even if you obtain it, it's fleeting.
Yeah.
Finances, for example. There may be times that, you become financially at peace.
Right.
But there's always this lingering external factor or factors that could happen that could wipe away everything.
Yep.
And you have zero control over that.
Yeah, you get one accident that's not even your fault, and medical bills pile up, or literally anything can throw off that sort of peace. Yeah, in seconds.
The markets.
Yeah,
the devaluing of a market, of a currency. If you say you're at retirement age and you have planned well, you've got you've been generous. You've been prudent, you've been wise, you've been all of these things, and there's a level of security there. Something happens within the markets or within a currency in our economy. They can be taken away in the blink of an eye. It's happened many times before.
Yeah.
So even in our most controllable atmospheres and the most controlled environments that we can create externally to bring about peace, that peace can always be taken away. And that's just the beauty of the peace of God, is that when you have that source is unmovable.
Right.
It's not going to be removed. It's not going to be changed. It's not going to be taken away. It's not going to be altered. It's not going to be edited in any way, unlike a lot of our videos. It is.
Yeah.
And it's there. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really know how to put this exactly, but what does it look like, internal peace? Like, how do you, practically, how do we attain or make use of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to the whole concept of spiritual warfare. Because if you've never encountered spiritual warfare before these past few years, you've experienced spiritual warfare as a believer these past few years.
Yeah.
Because it's a focus thing. To me, our internal peace is solely driven, or its health is completely dependent upon what is our focus on. And we'll kind of look at this a little bit next week when we talk about faith. But the strength of our faith is not in how strong we are. It's dependent upon the strength of what we have faith in.
Yeah.
And the reliability of that. So I think peace is the same way. Peace is not defined ultimately about what we can produce, because that's always going to be weak. But the strength of peace comes in, where does our peace lie?
Right.
And if we remain focused on that, then I think that peace settles. I can tell you that I remember very vividly, I can't remember exactly what point during the beginning stages of the pandemic we were in, but I was sitting at my desk in my office at the house doing church work. Staff meetings were over Zoom at that point, and everything was being done from home. And I remember getting up one morning early. I couldn't sleep. I went in there and was having my coffee and doing some work, getting started for the day, and just this overwhelming just angst fell over me of, what ifs? What if this happens? What if that happens?
Yeah.
What if I don't make it? What if my wife doesn't make it? What if my daughter does?
Yeah.
And just all of this concern and worry and anxiety just started just coming over me in waves. And I remember some moments into it where I just had to go, remember where your peace is. Remember where your hope is. And at that point, my focus was then shifted back to, okay, it's not that none of those worries don't exist anymore. It's just the fact of there's a greater reality of hope and peace that is above and beyond and unaffected.
Yeah.
Unaffected by those. So I think that's a practical thing of us to constantly, you're not going to avoid worry. You're not going to avoid anxiety or these situations. We holed up in our houses for a couple months, and we still couldn't avoid it.
Yeah.
But it was a matter of my focus in that situation. So I think that's the biggest practical takeaway is it's that taking captive of every thought.
Yeah.
And buffeting our body, our minds, our emotion, our will, making them subject to this discipline of focusing on Christ alone.
Yeah. So it's not so much a passive thing. It's a intentional, decision-led thing each and every day. It's not like you just become a Christian, get baptized, and all of a sudden you have inner peace.
Absolutely, yeah.
For the rest of your life. It's a daily chore.
Yeah. You never passively or inadvertently walk into peace.
Right.
That's going to last long term.
Yeah.
Because your example is spot on there with like a new believer. You're going to experience a new peace, a new feeling, a new almost tranquility in some ways at the very beginning. And man, you're going to be riding that mountaintop experience. And then it will come crashing down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's definitely very much an active, intentional thing that we have to do,
right,
day in and day out. Is keep that stirred.
Yeah, and if the peace ultimately comes from God, a good way to do that is to listen to Him, which involves like prayer and study, reading,
and just quieting your mind. Sometimes, we in the Christian faith, we cringe a little bit when we hear the word meditate, because we think of some form of Eastern mysticism as usually where our minds go of floating on a cloud somewhere, something.
Yeah.
The word meditate and the word medication come from the same Greek word, and that means to become healthy or to make healthy. And when you take these moments and you quiet yourself and you meditate on God, you meditate on His Word, His presence, His Spirit that dwells in you, then you are beginning to think in a way that will lead you to health And and this is a real slippery slope, and this isn't the purpose of this
Right.
this podcast, but there is something to positive thinking. There is something to having a good mindset, and I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking.
Sure.
But it is. When we fix our minds and we fix our affections, as David puts it, onto God, our perspective changes,
Right.
and that takes place in our mind, in the theater of our mind, when we will quiet ourselves. So the prayer, the Bible reading, the worshiping. 100%, but don't neglect that time of just quieting your mind.
Yeah.
That being still and knowing that He is God.
Yeah, very cool. One of the things that this whole thing made me think about, which is primarily more to do with the shoes as opposed to peace, or stable footing, I might say, would be the story of Peter and and him walking on water.
Yeah.
In that moment when he looks down at his feet and he loses his footing because he takes his eyes off of Christ. It's a very nice physical representation of the importance of having a solid footing built upon our faith and peace in Christ. Once we start worrying so much about external forces and things that are going on, or spiritual forces in this analogy, it's very easy to sink.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And if we think about it, in our times of the greatest fluidity of movement, we're not focusing on our feet.
That's a good line. The greatest fluidity of movement. Is that what you said?
Movement.
Moment sounds even more.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense, so it sounds more philosophical.
That sounds more like us. The greatest fluidity of movement. In those moments, we're not thinking about our feet. We're not looking down. There are times you need to look down to make sure you're stepping in the right places.
Sure.
But at the moments that is the most fluid,
Yeah.
and you're not thinking about your feet. They're secure.
Yeah.
They're stable. You know that where you're going to be landing next, or whatever position next, it's a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
So I think that there's probably a spiritual takeaway in that too.
Yeah. So which things did you have to chop for this week? Or have we covered them already? Because we've kind of gone through
we pretty much.
down a few rabbit holes.
There really wasn't a great deal that we had to chop. We have discussed a couple things that I would have maybe gone a little bit deeper, having given more time. But just that whole concept of peace, because we covered the elements of readiness. What do you need to be ready for?
Yeah.
We covered those pretty well, and then the how do you do it? How do you put these shoes on?
Right.
Know the gospel, believe the gospel, embrace the gospel, and that building on that, which we covered on Sunday.
Yeah, very cool. So where are we heading next week then?
Shield of faith.
Shield of faith.
Yeah. So listen, I got a text.
Very much defense driven then.
Yeah. And something that's bigger than us. And using Paul's analogy of the Greco-Roman military get up here. And I got a text a couple weeks ago from one of our church members here, and they said, "This is how I picture you in your office during the week studying for the armor of God." And it was somebody like a full Roman regalia, and I was like, "That's exactly what I do." So we're going to take a little bit of a look at historically again of what that would have meant to them at the time, the people, the readers at the time, culturally, contextually, when Paul's saying this shield of faith, what would have come to their mind and what they would have associated that with, not only what it would have looked like, but the multiple uses for it, and really how important it was from an honor standpoint. Because again, the shield was for your protection, but it was for more than just your protection. It could be used to protect others as well.
Yeah, very cool. That sounds great. Cool. We'll be diving into that next week. So yeah, I mean, peace is good. I'd like a little bit more of that in my life. Is pretty much where I'll end that
the
on.
understatement of this podcast right here. Yeah.
For real though. But yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, guys. If you want to, and if you're willing, please like and subscribe. And so
not if you want to, do it.
Do it. Smash it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Try not to do the voice, really.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll be back again next week for more Chop for Time.
I'm not going to wave this time.
Not going to wave?
No.
We're just going to sit in silence.
I'm just going to do the Eastern Kentucky head nod.